Now, here are the crucial matters here. I mean, I'm not supposed to, I'm in some role, right, where I'm not a lawyer. It's like I've had to do this alienation of myself, and I'm looking at myself, and, the focus was supposed to be on one thing, right? Looking at least as she understands, the charges. Now we're talking about the ex governor and the two current senators, specifically for the role of the three of them during a time frame when the former Secretary of Energy was the former governor of Texas at the onset of a commission that she believes is responsible for allowing people to be trafficked in connection with the development of biological weapons, including biological weapons that are fronting as a health pandemic currently, as well as other biological weapons and other kinds of unconventional weapons, including banned weapons that have used people as human test subjects for medical experimentation and have also subjected people to physical trauma and torture in order to render them incapacitated for being able to present a legitimate constitutional political challenge, including through an election process or through court or some other exercise of ordinary political process. And that her specific engagement with these two senators and the concurrences with the manners in which she's been trafficked and specifically denied a livelihood in pursuit of certification in non-destructive testing so as to be availed of the benefits associated with that training to be able to acquire gainful employment or potentially engage as a contractor regarding matters related to infrastructure security. That she understands that there is a consistent correlation between the originally identified charges concerning the Texas State Senate and what they're doing, and how it impacts other matters that require the intercession of the federal system, as well as that the specific charges against them are connected to their culpability with what's going on with the Texas legislature at this time. But there's this other matter that this projection, right, or this understanding of me has a very specific interest in, so far as I announced, for instance, as part of my presidential campaign last year. And there were specific policies regarding what could be identified as border security, but that are also about considerations of how people are being trafficked at this time through the Health and Human Services system. And while the original charges that were made in this case had to do with people that were by and large citizens of the United States that had need of services through a domestic violence or homeless shelter, and that they were being trafficked through the HHS and or in connection with facilities financed by HUD, that in manners that were a part of a pattern of racketeering activity, specifically about distribution of dangerous drugs as a means by which to habituate people to patterns of illegal activity as part of another political agenda. That there's also the matter of understanding the recent influx of people from Central America in the last several years as comprehensively correlated with significant fraud involving large-scale security instruments, including municipal bonds, but not exclusively municipal bonds. And that they are by and large correlated with and through a specific scheme and systematology involving the primary major banks that were availed of the benefits of the 2008 banking bailout, but not them exclusively. That what is really going on here is a more comprehensive conspiracy regarding not only what went on during the 2008 banking bailout, but how what went on during the 2008 banking bailout was correlated with changes that had occurred to the Texas Insurance Code that went into effect on September 1st of 2001, and how those changes to the Texas Insurance Code that went into effect on September 1st of 2001 were connected to failure to follow through on whatever was determined to be necessary to appropriately address what happened during the S&L crisis. These are matters that are directly in, shall we say, lineage in terms of the specific periods of time when major economic activity was being obfuscated in the course of commission of serious and substantial crime, and the evaluation of the manners in which the criminal elements were addressed at those times and which crime was focused on and pursued as crime in which manners made very substantial determinations on the trajectory of other elements of the political process. And we're dealing with that today. And in a lot of ways, the refusal to invest in certain kinds of political capital have prevented us from being able to acquire and maintain other kinds of actual economic, literal material capital in order to support ourselves, not just politically and socially, but also literally, materially. And in the course of evaluating these things, and some might say, well, these timelines, it's already happened. This profane happens. Like, well, it's already happened. It's already happened. We have to adjust. We have to move on. But what has also been happening is the same patterns keep replicating. And in the course of these same patterns replicating, the same kinds of criminal culprit, the criminal culpritdom is exposed. And the refusal to follow through on prosecution of that specific element of criminal culpritdom and instead attempt to transition the normalization of its legitimacy, which is not actually legitimate, ends up having other kinds of social and political costs. And we are now 2 generations down where we do not have the kind of investment from the younger generations in the maintenance of the overall structure that we should have had. And we're at a crisis, almost an existential crisis, where the more progressive or liberal values that were a part of our history, including throughout the 20th century, are being significantly damaged because we do not have the political credibility to back them up. We don't have the political credibility because we refuse to prosecute the appropriate kinds of crime to back up what were supposed to be vaunted as some of the positive contributions, including contributions that were supposed to benefit people that had been disempowered or people that had been disenfranchised historically. And I think a very real question needs to be called as to whether or not that was part of an intentional long-term conspiracy. That it actually exposes that at the heart of it, that there is a certain, they say power does not concede without being compelled to concede. I mean, how much is conceded and who's allowed to be sacrificed at what point in time? And we're at a critical stage where refusal to address the essence of the actual crime has prevented us from being able to get what we need even to sustain that crime. And in some ways, somebody leveraged and banked on being able to sustain that crime as an industry, as an economy, as a sector. And it's falling through. And I'm not personally much inclined to try to negotiate with people that are going to make a justification for continuing to invest what would otherwise be very beneficial and positive into something that is proven that it doesn't even acknowledge it as legitimate input. That it's basically there to fulfill some other, and this is the problem with the derivative action, it's there to fulfill some other need. But because of the crime involved with what has been misrepresented as the need, we can't say what it is explicitly. So we have to go through and get something as a derivative so that that can be what ends up getting focused on while we end up taking what is valuable about it and applying it elsewhere. Well, the question is, what was the onset here? What was the original thing of value here that was being considered? Well, it's a woman, a middle-aged white woman, no college degree, no bank account. At the time, she didn't have a job. She'd just come back to the city after being out of town for a few years. Alleged somebody said she had a mental problem. And she was in this shelter. There were other women. And some of them had jobs, some of them didn't. Some of them had bank accounts, some of them didn't. Some of them had to leave homes, some of them didn't have homes. And some kids. Some of their parents had jobs, some of their parents didn't. Some of them had to deal with the fact that their parents had been separated for a while. Okay, it's just one woman. It's just one shelter. Except that woman ended up getting sent from shelter to shelter to shelter to shelter to shelter to shelter to shelter. And now, where are we? I'm not interested in providing any insurance for any judges or members of the judicial branch of government that might be about to get their asses handed to them right now because they did not hold their colleagues accountable. I used to be in public health. I used to be in public health compliance. I'm going to be honest with you. I pretty much think that right now the entirety of alleged public health compliance needs to be put on the chopping block. But I also understand that there was a duty and that I was not just a middle-aged woman. There are things that I deserve to be restituted. There are things that the women and the children and the families I was with deserve restituted to us. We were not just about a job. And if those representing themselves that they're the leaders and that they are in a position of leadership as a representative of us aren't doing what they're supposed to do to accurately represent us, then they need to be removed. And I say this because I'm looking at something that otherwise I wouldn't know what it means, right? Would that woman know? She was supposed to fill out a paper, follow through in the form of a pauper. Okay, maybe she's got some money. If you're going to make her represent herself pro se, you're not going to give her a lawyer. You're not going to give her access to a prosecutor. You're not going to give her access to a criminal investigator. You don't even give her a social worker. You don't give her a liaison through the court. You don't give her somebody that might be able to give her some gleaning, for instance, on concerns she might have about abuse of veterans' benefits while they're in the same situation she's in, and they're trying to talk to her about their skills and expertise from their military specialties, and she's concerned that they're being attempted for enticement into a terrorist recruitment syndicate. So she might want to talk to somebody involved with military law. Yeah, no, you're not going to give her any of that. What you're going to do is you're going to tell her there's some filing fee she needs to pay if she wants her whatever she creates or whatever she's able to do to get put through the court system. Okay, maybe she doesn't have to go as a pauper because maybe she actually has some money. Are you going to tell her about this? Rule 62, stay of proceeding, stay with bond on appeal. E, stay without bond on an appeal by the United States. How about this one? What does this even mean? Rule 65.1, proceedings against a surety. Court clerk as agent for receiving service of any papers that affect its liability on the bond or undertaking. If you tell a woman that's trying to bring a criminal RICO case, she has to proceed in the form of a pauper, what kind of bond do you put on that case? If she tries to file a case through an appropriate procedure, including in connection with having access to the electronic filing system at a particular level with a particular understanding of her positioning in the case, and she files a specific kind of motion, and then the clerk of the court intentionally misrepresents what it is. Why? What does this say in here? Are you going to tell her about this? Amici. See, some proceedings do not let you appeal if you're an amicus. If you filed an amicus curiae, you are not eligible to file an appeal or to challenge a judgment or an order in a case. But what about the bond on that damn case? The clerk of the court intentionally misrepresented what the motion itself was. The clerk of the court also intentionally refused to allow for acknowledgement of other motions, including a motion in consideration of a request to present evidence. And then what ends up happening down the road? Are you going to tell that woman? Are you going to tell that woman you forced to represent herself pro se? Anything about what that even means? She files her filing fees for her case before the court. They say to her, send her a letter in the mail. 2 weeks later, we need you to file these files. Well, I already filed the filing fee. And she goes down there. They can't find it in the system. So she's about ready to file. She's like, okay, I'll pay again. No. They intentionally put the wrong number. They intentionally put the wrong case number on the payment so that they could double charge her for a court record she had already paid for, knowing that the second notice on the payment for the filing of the case came after a major deadline that had already been hedged on by the person who was on the other side of the court in the proceeding, who had the bond on that case. He's the one that filed the charges. She had to represent herself pro se. What about this woman? Talking about bond fraud, talking about securities fraud. You make her sign up and agree to be a pauper the entire time she's in Texas. And then you automate it for referral. Are you ever going to tell her about that? What does this mean? Rule 65.1, proceedings against a surety. Who's the surety in my case? Who's the surety in case number 17-0722? I'm sorry, 17-0622. What about 18-0600? What about WR-87139-01? Who is the surety? Is it the people? Then why the hell didn't you make me the Attorney General? Or at least send me to the Attorney General? Why didn't the Attorney General advance the cause of that woman, or that other woman, or that other woman? Why did the Texas legislature instead allow for an unconstitutional change to the laws of Texas and say, Attorney General has exception to reporting on the terms of select contracts that he negotiates with a contractor with the state of Texas? How much did that surety agent get as a commission for that woman and her kids? How much did that surety agent get as a commission for my case? What about the district court? What about the district court? Now, they accepted it in the form of a pauper. They issued a judgment. They issued an order. Didn't make any sense from an actual legal perspective. And then they insisted on following up in a timeline that didn't make sense with the case itself, but made sense in other cases, including, well, let me ask you, what cases need a chemical surety from the United States Army? What cases need a nuclear surety from the United States Army? Are you ever going to acknowledge what that means? She was trafficked because she wanted to report child abuse involving children at domestic violence shelters, and after you racket her ass for 3 fucking years, you're hooking up derivatives connected to fucking nuclear sureties with the Army? What do you expect? What would you expect your president to do if somebody was doing that in another country?